So I will talk, the first 14 slides will be about issues of what makes an ideal space or an ideal place, and then we'll take a break, and then I'll talk about these two case studies. But I am a practicing architect in Philadelphia. I'm also an urban dweller. I live in a row house, which is an 18-foot wide house from the 1830s. I'm also a senior lecturer at one of the local colleges, Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. So what I want to talk today a little bit about, at least the first three sections, are what is it that makes a city sustainable? And we talked a little bit about from an energy perspective, but also from a livelihood perspective and a place to live, the public spaces in American context, and then small towns and community space, and we can then break and have a little discussion. Mm-hmm. And also, as a practicing architect, I always wanted to be an artist, a fine artist, and I brought one of my sketchbooks that I have, and I still draw by hand. I don't ever draw on the computer. That's why I have 20 people in my office to draw on the computer. But these drawings are all about what is a sense of space. And today I want to talk about the difference between space and place, because what I try to draw is not a building or a landscape, but the building's relationship to the landscape itself. What is it that makes it special? What is it that makes it very unique? And we just had a wonderful conversation outside about listening to a client, talking to the client, and because we do not commission the commissions we get. Someone else pays for them, someone else tells us what they want, and it's our job to interpret what they're saying, turn it into a work of art that is a commodity, very much the way Vitruvius talked about, and then convince the client it was the client's idea to begin with, and that they really had a very vested role in it, which of course they did, and then we can all celebrate it and then talk about the next project we're going to do. And the two I will talk about after we have the break is this Arts Park Pavilion in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and this McCoy Street housing in Easton. So the whole notion for me as an architect, why I got into it, is the four things that I think we as architects are supposed to bring to each of our projects.
Yeah, we could remove that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Hit the next.
Big one.
All right. So the four things as architects that I think we bring to a project are variety, surprise, comfort, and joy. And I think in all the places that I use as inspiration, variety, surprise, comfort, and joy all kind of enter into it. And I showed these images that have all intrigued me about a place to see and be seen at this cafe in Paris. We talked about the piazza a little bit. What is the notions of an outdoor space? How do we get together? Istanbul, Turkey, about the bazaar, that you're immediately overwhelmed and overtaken by the fantastic variety. Kyoto, Japan, which hopefully we'll talk about tomorrow. The topography, the sense of scale, and the notions that a space can be just as amazing during the day as it is in the evening, and that we want to go back. And then I don't want to undervalue, nor should we, about the notion of positive recollection. Why do we go to a space? Why do we come back to a space? And I use the phrase experiential destination, and all these things are experiential destinations that we want as architects to make our spaces that we design experiential destinations. That's how we know that we can succeed. So, just to focus a little bit on the American downtown, I've written that city can really be a lonely place without spaces to bring people together. That we, as architects, our job is to create spaces for people to socialize and to collaborate and exchange ideas. That is the notion of the difference between a space and a place, that we need to define what it is that makes a place special. And certainly during COVID-19 and after COVID-19, it is really an amenity that we need to create. This is one of the public outdoor spaces in Houston, Texas, which is a city notorious for being car-driven and car-oriented. And the fact that during COVID, they really turned an outdoor space into a place that became a destination. And that, again, these social spaces are only successful if we make connection points, that we join neighborhoods together to create communities. A lot of the themes that we've heard already today are really kind of reinforcing those ideas here. Some of the fantastic things that I thought when we started to get into social spaces and what they're about, there's many different things in this chart that define a social space, but the first two things which are not surprisingly are restaurants, cafes, and bars and lounges, places to meet and exchange ideas, and then parks and green spaces, which we've talked about together. These are the things that people want to be part of, that people want to be invested in, and how do they really feel that they can be part of a larger self and really contribute. So the other things, public transit and shopping districts, et cetera, they all define successful places, but they're not as important really as the first two. So cities and public spaces, here's two that do not work really well, and I think the idea maybe for the discussion afterwards is to talk about why spaces that try to be places fail. And in this case, this is Pershing Square in Los Angeles, another city that's overwhelmingly defined by the car. This is Legaretto, who's a Mexican architect that came in, and he's really using architecture as sculpture. And what didn't work here? And I would argue that the overwhelming scale and the lack of shade in a place like Los Angeles really doesn't create spaces that are conducive to social gathering. This park, as you can see, has attracted issues of homelessness that has really been detrimental to the rejuvenation of Los Angeles downtown. There's also lack of interaction with the proper downtown amenities. And so when you take certain objects and you super scale them, supersize them, and try to add color and things like that, if you're not attentive to the minutiae of people's needs and the pedestrian level amenities, we talked about in Rome, at least there's shade trees there, but here Los Angeles in Pershing Square has really been an abysmal failure. So on the flip side, I want to talk about a place a little closer to where we are in Philadelphia. This is in New York, the High Line. The upper two slides have been very successful over the last 10 years that the High Line was finished. It's much better done at a pedestrian scale, these small spaces for interaction, and the amenities for connection. The way the High Line cuts through various high-rise buildings has become a real impetus for development along the perimeter. Some of the furniture in the upper right slide actually moves and can slide on rails, a connection history. But actually, I did not know until recently myself, I'm sort of embarrassed about it, is that when field operations did the High Line, they drew precedent from Paris. That the Promenade Planté in Paris also was an abandoned rail line as well. You can see in the lower right an existing rail line, and how, again, do we as architects not just always design new buildings or new structures, but can work and adaptively reuse them, again, using a rail line, filling it in below. The notions of water features on a High Line I thought was wonderful. Shade, I guess the notion of, again, about variety, surprise, comfort, and joy. And I find that the High Line as a structure that stitches buildings together can be very, very compelling. One thing different, we've talked about Europe and America a little bit, is that in Europe I find that there's a much more attentive care for social spaces and for integration of people and places. America is the land of capitalism. We pride ourselves in having low taxes, and as a result of having low taxes, it means that we don't take care of our own. We've abdicated that responsibility to developers. And so in New York, what this map shows on the left is we make deals. That's what America is all about. We make deals with developers that is a high-rise. Every green dot is a high-rise. For every high-rise that you do, you'll get additional stories if you devote public space for people at the base of the building. So a building, by our zoning laws, you can build 50 stories, but if you go 60 stories, if you devote a certain amount of space to public amenities. And what has happened over time is that because of homelessness and because of the fact that it's a deal and because of bank loans, et cetera, a lot of deals that have been made to create public spaces have all been walled off and have been fenced off right now. And there's a number of lawsuits that are going on in New York about people and developers who were given additional stories and have no longer created spaces for people to interact and meet at the street level. So small downtowns have really been kind of challenged by suburbanization. So people have fled downtowns, a lot of downtowns, and it's only been exacerbated since COVID. And one of the questions has been earlier about one of the biggest evils of perhaps more so America than anywhere else is that we're a car-based culture, and that what we've done about that. And so public spaces like this is in Providence, Rhode Island, about how to create spaces for people to feel very much vested in American culture. This really kind of came out of COVID. This gave us a chance to rethink our public spaces, and there's been a real kind of benefit of focusing on outdoor social spaces. But these spaces are only going to really work well if we can really kind of connect business and public institutions better together. And I think, again, the idea in New York was to tie business and public together and not abdicate our own responsibilities to the public, but really build some of these community partnerships. So a couple more slides to talk about and the car culture and what's that done to America. The photograph on the left is by Paul Strand. He's one of my favorite photographers. It's from 1915, so it's over 115 years ago that this photograph was done. But in the early 20th century, that's when the move away from agriculture into the cities really began in many ways. And it began because of the changes in transportation, and it certainly began because of a rise in industrialism. But what I think Strand captures so much here that really resonates with me is this sense of loneliness, that overwhelming the architecture on its institutional scale that is not at scale of pedestrian is in many ways alienating. And as a result of this kind of alienation, we have created a culture, as you can see in the right-hand slide, from this wonderful book called God's Own Junkyard from 1964, about a landscape that's really been altered beyond recognition and hopefully not beyond salvation. But the car culture, the gasoline culture, the carbon emission culture that goes with it has really altered the landscape. And so I think this quote is gets close to where the break is. This is Henry Ford, the inventor of the car. He says, quote, "I will build a motor car for the great multitude, so low in price that no man will be unable to own one and enjoy with his family the blessings of hours of pleasure in God's great open spaces." So by making the car accessible to everybody, and so the fact that everyone is able to see open spaces, we at the same time destroying those open spaces by making it accessible to all without creating a defined space. And so what we have done is this image on the left. We have actually destroyed the spaces that we had wanted to preserve by cutting through them in order to get there. So it's kind of a defining moment for us, and what it's really done, I'll kind of break here, is where we are going with this and what it has done to us, and how spaces in downtowns, like you can see here, where we didn't have cars. We used to walk from the church to the corner store, to the factory, to the tap room, and that was our lives, and that was our community. And that has really been changed by the highway bypass and by a change in culture and a change in the way we do business these days. We've talked about social media, and has that really brought us together, or has it really kind of pulled us apart? And even this notion about how these downtowns have really changed. And certainly as an architect, our job, now that these steel mills have closed, Johnstown had a huge steel mill. Yes, it's great to reinvent them and adaptively reuse them, but in some ways, I recall a past where you did not need a college education and that you could work in a place like this. And I think that's been lost. So maybe that's a good break point, and we can talk about how to take some of these spaces and turn them around.
Okay. We can start the discussion?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Many thanks for the first part. The overall theme to refer to the morning was the attempt to re-establish communities. If we take the synoikia, the living together, in this direction, so how we can generate communities. You cannot willingly create it, they will evolve, they are generated. And if we take these images of the existing urban fabric that Sam presented, what were the major points from your side when you see what Sam has presented?
As an architect, how can you anticipate the changes I mean, usually you have an idea how people should live and how they could integrate themselves into the space. But often things change, like other people come in, communities change, or whatever, and then everything is completely different from that view. How can an architect foresee these things?
I mean, I think that's a really good question. I mean, I've gotten to that age where nostalgia kind of gets in the way. And things move so fast now. They move so much faster than they did 10, 20, 30 years ago. And I think I romanticize and idealize a past that will never be there again. And I don't know what's going to happen next, except I think as responsible architects, our job is to take buildings that have particular character and that are iconic to their locales and make sure that they're repurposed, both for ecological purposes and sustainability purposes, but to make sure, as I talked about in the beginning, about making places a destination again, the recollection of something that's so good. But I think being an architect is such, it means so many different things to different people. And we were talking again about the fellow architects in here about what we don't learn in architecture school and what we just learned with experience along the way. And it's all about design, design, design. There's nothing about business development, and there's nothing about the impact that you have on your designs, because these buildings they last a long time. At least they should last a long time, but what kind of impact are they going to have cultures moving forward?
Please.
In some of the projects I've been working with, we have worked with the politicians in the city, for example.
Yeah.
And to be re-elected today, you cannot have any ideas about the future because you will not be re-elected. and in your presentation here, you talk about the deal, and I think dealing us forward is not a good idea because then we miss to elaborate and think about possible futures together before we start realizing them. So I think this is we turn around and go backwards into the future, also related to nostalgia in that sense.
That's an interesting point.
Well, we elected, at least in the United States, our last president was all about making the deal. And people gravitate towards that. Because I think in a lot of ways we're selfish. And we're also very self-protective. I think the communal aspect is something that's kind of lost right now.
I really like your 2 points. Of course, I agree with the third one, which is joy, perhaps the outcome of the first 2, the variety and the surprise. And I think those are 2 very important, and especially when you look at those after the war, the social housing developments, no man's land. There is no variety, there is no surprise. In fact, like I said, I know the story from China, where it's a forest of new buildings. Even though they have to number them and color them, some of the residents can't find their way home. Maybe GPS now helps them, but I mean, it's not kidding. And not to say anything about the foreigner who goes there and sees this uniform environment where there is absolutely no joy or anything what you could do, not necessarily as a community, but even a person alone. You just can't find. You wonder, like the photograph what you showed, it is a perfect illustration of that alienation, what we create, perhaps at that time, even starting with the industrialization, wherein there is nothing I can do with a building. There is no interaction, blank wall. So out of that comes the third one, which is the joy. So I fully agree with you. And what is that? I don't necessarily like the word nostalgia, we all fall into it. But the past is an important dimension to it without nostalgia. I know that many Americans, including myself, although I grew up here in Europe, many of them come in here, just old towns. there is a certain kind of well, culture, maybe intimacy of those spaces. And you showed me the Los Angeles, the car culture, wherein everything somehow just falls apart, divided into hopeless kind of places, placelessness. So that's a beautiful illustration there, wherein no trees, there is a sculpture there, but who knows why, and then, so it just simply falls apart. Well, I just simply agree with you.
This is a general point, is a cultural trait in modernity. There was this French anthropologist, Marc Auger, who has written about this placelessness in modern times plus today. He called his book non-places, as a transit spaces,
Right.
the images you shown. And the interesting point, I think, is as regards habitation. Also, when the classical ideal of habitation was at least to create some public places, a space where a public could meet. This is completely lacking in the functionalist modernist architecture. Sean?
I was thinking as you were talking about the automobile, what does time play for what kind of role is that playing in your planning architecture? Because I think it was also Henry Ford who kind of shaped the idea of the weekend as sort of like the day off for the workers, so they had an opportunity to use the car. and so architecture is
And the motivation to buy.
exactly. And my question here is like, is there also, are you, when you shape a space, do you also think about that most people work from Monday to Friday and have one day in the week where they're off? And also there's a big gap between homeless people that have no job and seem to sit around all day, and other people having to work, becoming the notion of like an unfair, or that people are lazy, especially in the US, I think.
I mean, I guess the issue with the car specifically, and it's the notion of 3 8-hour shifts, that you had 24 hours of work and then 2 days off. It certainly, it gave jobs to people that didn't have jobs. It gave freedom on the weekends to pursue other ideas. But I think what it has done, what it started, not just the issues of carbon emissions, is that we can do anything we want, anytime, any place, without regard to the consequences. And so I guess that's where I would argue that by getting access to anywhere, anytime we wanted, we haven't been able to rationalize or thought about the impact it has on other things. And you can see it on multiple different levels, the notion of family, the notion of architecture, the notion of space, the notion of open space, how that's all changed.
I'd like to add to it, it has accelerated time, a big time. And the times what we have here is incredibly fast. And I think automobiles, not just because of the speed that they provided relative to how you walk, it's a completely different way of perception of the time and everything else, the place. And it certainly undermines what we could call as place, the intimacy.
Yeah. I would also say that in the United States especially, the electric car is now seen as the salvation of American society.
Right.
And not once has there ever been thought, even in the current administration, which I support, is that there should be much more devoted to public transportation for the masses. And that is not happening whatsoever.
Right.
And to your point, it's because you can't talk about the future because it's all about votes for what happens next. I mean, I wish Biden would talk about public transportation, but he can't alienate the voters whose biggest issue in the United States right now is the cost of a gallon of gas. And if that goes up, you will not get reelected.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But it is really a change when, as I do often go to Japan, when public transportation is second to none.
Yeah.
It's an amazing, to me, that it takes an hour, just public transportation it's no problem. But back home, 5 minutes, going to somewhere, the car is mind-boggling.
Yeah.
I am late, and so on. So I fully agree with you, and I am tremendously bothered that the train service is not anywhere
Yeah.
in the States, because the airline industry has a big lobby in there, so you have to fly. Yeah, it has accelerated the whole thing.
Well, I think even before that was
Right.
in the Eisenhower administration, how Ford and the oil companies all got together to see if they could bankrupt the railroads. And because,
That's right.
and that's really what turned the automobile industry around and built the Interstate Highway Act.
That's right.
And so government really conspired against the public.
That's right. And it's against the public.
Yeah, it's
Public
totally against the
transportation, the interest of the public.
No question.
Sean?
Is there a possibility of architects pushing for like, or let's say that the people using your buildings don't have enough time to really use the buildings? Is there any, I don't know, because architects are not re-elected, but I guess there is a different kind of power mechanism.
Well, I mean, that's a great question. We're not re-elected, but the best way to get a commission is to get a referral or get a repeat commission. And it's just actually that'll lead into the next part about the talk, because the biggest time suck for us as architects is always having to go after a proposal, writing another proposal which we're not reimbursed for. But if you can make a client feel comfortable that you met his needs, his interests, and met his budget, ideally when the next project comes along, they will call you. And so, and to have a client who's smart and who's compassionate, that's what we all are looking for. Yeah.
I'd like to pose perhaps a quite a banal question. I really love your categories as well, and it's the first time I heard of joy as a kind of category 5 picture. But you didn't talk about aesthetics.
Sorry, what?
Aesthetics.
Aesthetic.
I left that for last month.
Is this a category? I mean, I've seen your drawings, and I'm certainly convinced that aesthetics is an important category.
Yeah.
Also talking about men's size.
Pedestrian scale.
Yes,
Yeah.
pedestrian scales.
I think that's good. You're right. I mean, to me, I guess variety, surprise, comfort, and joy turns into aesthetics. But I certainly would not forget it. Yeah.
I agree, because the postmodernism went by aesthetics and ended up in, well, we know.
If we try to collect in our minds all the points that have been brought up, and if you see these points as an essential framework of the existing situation, not only as regards architecture, but also as regards the socio-economic frame conditions. No? What we could do if we remember what had been said in the morning about the ideal of the polis, of the synergia, of different, also the synergia between the different social groups, what to do? And these are the frameworks. And what is your idea of an ideal space also as an imagined space? An ideal space is not only as an ideal in the common sense, as a perfected utopian space, it's also just an imagination. No? As an idea, not the Greek idea. I have an inner image of something. What about the ideal space when we look at these frame conditions?
So I'll go on to the case studies.
You and all, as you like.
So I'll show now how I've gotten to what I consider the ideal space. And again, although I'd like to be an artist and I can capture what I feel are ideal spaces as an architect, it's much more challenging because we have to find clients and they have to find us to create those. So again, to me, these are the notion of the small town. The small town had the town square, it had the place to work, it had the house of worship, the corner tap room, etc. These were communities, and nostalgia or not nostalgia, there's certain things about these that I think we as architects need to learn and appreciate. So the converse of that is this, which to me has been the bane of our existence, which is e-commerce, which has really kind of taken over. Again, because we live in America where land is inexpensive, that these spaces, these Amazon warehouses, e-commerce are not conducive to the pedestrian scale. And this last statistics I was not even aware of, that Philadelphia, which is a city of 1.5 million people, has over 14 million square feet of warehouse space under construction. So to the point that was mentioned before, where is the variety, where's the surprise, where's the comfort, where's the joy in buildings like this? And for us, as not just as human beings, does immediate access to things at the press of a button mean that we should live that way? Where do we make that kind of judgment? And I have two daughters who, every time I found out that they're going to order from Amazon, I said, you live in a city that has an amazing downtown. Don't order it until you go to the local bookstore, the local clothing store to see if they have it, because we need to maintain and the revitalization of the city. That's what we're here for. That's what we need to do. So it's been a constant challenge about understanding about instantaneous access to things and the impact that it has on the landscape. So to get to what was just mentioned about what is the ideal space, and so this is Thomas Jefferson at University of Virginia, which I think is an amazing campus, but I had not realized until I started to do a little bit of research on Karlsruhe coming here today, that the map of Karlsruhe was given to Thomas Jefferson and Longfellow when he laid out Washington, D.C., the whole kind of radial city. So I think it's, you guys started it, we just picked up on it, which doesn't surprise me at all. But I was just at UVA not that long ago, University of Virginia, and I found, it's beautifully proportioned. The notion of the man-made and the wild landscapes, we've kind of, maybe it's not wild per se, because now I've learned better after hearing Massimo talk, but about a kind of tamed garden space within these walls. It's also durable and well-scaled materials, unlike the Amazon warehouses, which I just showed you. It has a built intervention in the landscape. There's the variety, there's the surprise level there. The symmetry and the asymmetry that comes with someplace like this, and the sense of comfort and safety with the kind of elements of surprise. To me, this sets the bar really high for us as architects about what we should look for as far as commissions that we want to tackle. So when people come to us as architects and say, Sam, we want you to design the XYZ, and the firm I work for, we do a lot of college university buildings, we design museums, we design kindergarten through 12 schools, we design religious buildings. I'd like to have this little check mark by my desk and say, are we going to be able on this project to deal with interaction? Are we going to be able to create a safe space where people can gather all times of year? What's the proximity to social networks and physical networks? And are the uses and activities, are they going to be flexible? Is this building going to last? And can we really get together with local businesses to support the various projects? And then access and linkage, is there pedestrian safety? Is this a general pedestrian environment we're going to tackle? How do we connect to the community? And is it going to be used by many people of various ages and abilities? How does that factor into the commission? And again, unlike the warehouses, this should be about ease of maintenance. It should be a building that should last 100 years. That to me is an ideal building. And it should be engaging. It should be part of a neighborhood. It should really fit in. And it doesn't mean it needs to be quasi-traditional or historicist, but it needs to activate the space. And it really should have abundant landscaping, be it a garden or a park, but how do the fingers of the built and the natural fit into one another comfortably? To me, that's the ideal commission. And hopefully we can continue to get this without bankrupting the firm at the same time. So I have two case studies that I wanted to talk about to kind of close out this talk. One is this case study 1, which is this Allentown Arts Park Pavilion that we were commissioned to do. How can existing social spaces be programmed to better serve communities? This is a space that needed to turn into a place. And how can arts and culture really have a role in the defining and definition of changing a place from a space to a place? And then case study number 2 is at Lafayette College, which is a very good small liberal arts college outside Philadelphia. How can educational institutions support local communities and their need for open social space? And how can these ideas of community connection be applied to local context? In the United States, certainly there's a lot of what's called town gown, where the small towns and then the college is immediately part of it. They've been separate for years. They don't talk to one another. The students don't go into the towns because of safety, and we don't want the public to come into the colleges or the students to leave the campuses. And now there's much more of a change to better integrate those. And so these are two commissions that we got. Actually, we didn't have to compete for them. They came through word of mouth. so which made it even better for us. So they were very good. So the first one is this one in Allentown. So the Lehigh Valley Railroad no longer exists. It was a major thoroughfare that joined New York all the way up to Erie and up to Canada. You can see Allentown, Pennsylvania was a huge industrial town. It had a railroad turnaround. And I don't actually want to be nostalgic, because one reason this railroad existed at all is because this is coal country. A lot of the coal that was got down to the ground fed these railroads and polluted the areas. It also provided jobs both in the coke and coal industry as well as the steel industry. So it sustained a middle-class way of life for many, many people before the college really got to be bigger in these areas. So Allentown, Pennsylvania is a small town right outside Philadelphia. The blue is Pennsylvania. It's a row house community. It now has started to have a much bigger downtown because it's really reinventing itself, as many of the factories have left. And so it gives a bigger role for arts and culture and for the colleges. And I think colleges and arts and culture have had to pull the weight of industries moving out of those particular areas. So in Allentown, City Center Lehigh Valley is the client who we had. And what they have started to do is purchase, with public and private partnership, various plots of underutilized land, various plazas and green spaces, and what we call stitching them together through pedestrian rights of way, so that there's the variety, there's the joy, there's the sense of connection in these various neighborhoods. This neighborhood has transformed dramatically from being an all-white working-class community 80 years ago to heavily Hispanic community, lots of Spanish-speaking people who've come ostensibly to work in factory jobs that just as they arrived, those factory jobs were disappearing. So this is the space that we had to deal with on the right. It was a completely underutilized passive green space. And, you know, interesting, as was talked about before, people lie on it, they throw trash on it, they don't really take care of it, and it's a flat, undefined particular space. And so the city decided that they needed to turn it into a destination. And so we were commissioned to really look at it and turn it into an arts and culture space. And it is amazingly wonderful in that it's surrounded on a number of different sides by arts and cultural institutions. So this is the space here. On one side you have the Miller Symphony Hall, which has this nice mural on it of music on one side. The Baum School of Art on one side, which is a place to go and learn how to be a fine artist. And the other side, you have the Allentown Art Museum. So this arts and cultural destination is actually bookended on both sides by a place to play music and a place to learn art. So this is the brief that we got is, how do you activate an existing green space? We are trying to create, this is the program, activate this lawn, turn it into something special, make it a flexible space for a variety of city programs, theater, music, showing films, etc. And then encourage people to use the park as an opportunity for arts and nature. And that is really the task we were given. So we work with a landscape architect to come up with some ideas to transform this space. So in the office we sat down, we had tracing paper, we thought about the Symphony Hall on one end, the stage, the tiered seating, the acoustics, how might that extend into this green space? The arts mural, which is a backdrop, layers, frame perspectives, and what is Allentown Arts Museum all about? The sculpture, the vibrancy, what does that really bring to the green spaces, these bookends? So here's the plan that we came up with, and again, this notion of an amphitheater kind of came into the space as well. But the Symphony Hall on one end and the Art Museum on the other, and about defining a destination and a focal point, because this green space really lacked a focal point. So if you look on the bottom right, the whole idea about the Symphony Hall in our mind says it's thought about sheets of music and about what is sheets of music really all about, how can that influence architecture. And then the museum, because Allentown was a big textile mill town, they have an incredible collection of textile rolls and fabric. And so we came up with this idea in the study model is to take sheets of music and textiles and create a stage and a destination that was fluid and liquid in many ways that picked up on that, because you could do a stage anywhere, but how do you make something that's site-specific and iconic for Allentown? And so after, I think I came in the weekend and made that model, paper model, and then one of my younger guys on the computer, he started to figure out how that could sit at the end of the lawn and become part of the destination. And because, as you can see, I like to draw by hand, I was trying to figure out how do I take these ideas of a textile fabric and sheets of music and turn it into something that's fluid. And honestly, I could draw this all day long, but without the computer, this project would not come to pass. But one of the materials that we like, and we talked a little bit about sustainability today, is wood and about laminated beams. And only laminated beams, and I guess steel as well, but laminated beams are much more sustainable. They could really make this curve come to pass. And so the idea was about create a stage, and then as you create a space, a real destination place, you would curve at the bottom, and that would become the green room and then the bathroom. So that the public park had actually a place that you could use 24 hours a day, and it became a focal point at the end of the park. So these sketches then were turned into these more computerized renderings. That's the Symphony Hall mural behind us. You can see people now using the lawn in certain places. This is for yoga and for passive recreation, and so that the curved stage canopy just serves as a backdrop, but it becomes a focal point. And then it can change over time. This is how the re-laminated timbers fit. So my client is raising money for this now, but this just won a American Institute of Architects award about ways that can revitalize the city. And then the view looking back towards the park. This is a place in shelter if it starts to rain. This is open to the public for everyone to use. It's a democratic place, accessible to everyone. And then this is how it looks in plan. As you can see, as the canopy changes in section and becomes the plan. That's the restroom that's accessible to all. And then the landscape architect did a wonderful job, because it's not just the way the light hits the building and how it changes, but that chairs can be set in a variety of different ways. They can be planted. She'd written about it for symphony performance in the upper left. It can be then for movie nights, how the chairs are set up. For yoga on the lawn in the lower left, where people set apart, and then for doing art markets and flea market. So it's really the activity and the variety and the kind of joy of coming here is really what kind of makes it a destination.
Am I right that the landscape architecture also deviated from the flatness?
There's a slight pitch to it.
There's a pitch to that, and then the grandstands or the open theater kind of.
Exactly, at
right.
the back you get the
smart.
So it has to be just flat enough that the yoga people don't feel it in their shins.
Right.
But just inclined enough that you can see over the shoulders of the people in front of you when you want to see a concert.
That's a great move.
Right. So what this rendering shows is, I think the biggest challenge we had for this project is public-private, because during the day it's completely accessible, but they wanted to do a paid event too. And so we have brass-covered holes that you can put stanchions in the evening, with pullable screens that come out so that you can charge however many dollars to actually see an event at night and then take it down and not interrupt the landscape.
You know what is interesting about this? That the stage is backing or away from the shelter, rather than using the shelter as perhaps a part of the stage.
Well, the stage and the shelter, but the amphitheater is all over. There's also
It's
one
on
in
the other
back.
side.
Yes, you
Right.
can see it in the back. Yeah, exactly. All right. So then I'll briefly just talk about this last other project, which is this kind of town and gown idea. This town is 10 miles away from that one. This site, which I'll talk about, had some houses on it that were all torn down. And some were torn down, but we actually picked up a building and actually moved it. We picked it up in the United States, everywhere, I guess you can put some tractor trailers underneath some things and move it out of the way. So in this case, this is a residential and historic character neighborhood, and we really need to make both student amenities and residential amenities as well, and create places for outdoor intervention. So this is Lafayette College. The name of the builder's down there, and our name is on there as well in order to do this site. So this is a town that has many wonderful building. I wouldn't say necessarily they're historic, but they're very defining. And I love the notion of front porch because you are part of the public, but at the same time, it's your private space. It's the space that separates you from the street. But the topography here is wonderful. There's some incredibly bizarre, almost architecture with these funny bays that poke out in many different shapes. But these places on the right, all the way on the right, were the places that people worked in these neighborhoods, so the clothing factory, etc. And again, a lot of these have moved in the United States. Union jobs have moved a lot of jobs to the south, and then now they've moved overseas as well. So the college, what happens is they buy more and more land because it's cheap. People have moved away, and so it's a relationship based on friction of town and gown. And so oftentimes we've started some projects where buildings have been altered beyond recognition, and then these are some sketches I did about how to redo the facades in the buildings and activate the streets with cafes and bistros, much like I showed with Paris and Siena and Kyoto, about what is it that defines a street edge, what is it that makes a space have some life, and makes you feel safe enough to go there all the time. And I think colleges generally are looking for this so that they will attract students because of the competition. So these were two parking lot sites. And the college hired us to do a 150-bed dormitory on the left and another 150-bed dormitory on the right. What's in front of us is the college, Lafayette College, founded in the 1850s, and what's behind it is the town of Easton, which has a lot of people that worked in the mills before, and this relationship between the two groups is very challenging. And so, again, the word social worker was mentioned before. Our job here as the architect was to get townspeople together with college people together and work with the college to say, you can't just go in here and say, this is what we're building here. We need to activate and engage the people in the city of Easton, because what has happened at many colleges is the neighbors feel that the college existed up until the main street right there, up until the 1920s. And what's to keep them from going further and further and buying the next house, etc. But what was not clear, and we found out later, and we didn't know ourselves, that the college actually does own all the land beyond this. And then what they've done, they have stockpiled it and then give it to professors as part of their compensation packages to attract them to come to the college. So the neighbors felt that they were being subjected to undue process of development, but actually the college already owned that land. And so how the college managed that was a whole another topic. So phase one, 150 beds. Phase two, we did the Black Cultural Center, which actually was that building that we moved that actually had been on that site. We moved it down, and then we did a career center. So I'm only going to talk about phase one, which was just finished 2 years or so ago, and it was so successful that they hired us to do phase two, which again I didn't have to compete for. They were so happy with phase one. So part of the relationship with the college and the neighbors was, don't just build 150 beds and put on the site. What do we as the neighbors get out of it? And so we actually elevated the. And so in the lower left is a bookstore and shop that's open both to the college and to the neighbors. And on the far side is a diner, a restaurant that's also open to the public. And in between is an amphitheater, is the public space. And I would not have thought about it until the talk this morning, is that in creating this outdoor space, this amphitheater, like Epidaurus that we talked about yesterday, it's actually the college that's the backdrop. So this is, it would be used by the public. It faces back to the college on the left, but this is both for student use and it's also for the public use. So they have movie screenings here. They have music here, bands play here as well. There's also some theater. All the furniture is flexible. If you eat in the diner, which is off to the right, you can come sit outside here. There's a lawn off to the left there. That is where the bookstore is. And the buildings were built into the topography and in the land. And we added the dormers. It looks like it's a three-story building, but it's really a four-story building by tucking underneath the roof. And as architects, we have a responsibility, I think, create buildings that are contemporary, but they reflect the traditional architecture on the left, but they don't go any higher than the houses of the neighbors across the way. And by adding window bays and brick, etc., we are trying to fit in, and it doesn't imitate them, but the phrase that we like to use is that it's contextual. And I think, again, there was somebody mentioned before about the wall. And there is a wall here, and it is a wall that doesn't separate, but we like to think it's a wall that engages. It's low enough, this is what we have to do as architects, it's low enough that it defines the public from the private. It's low enough that you can sit on it. It's also low enough that the community police said, we don't want somebody who may break into a store to hide behind that wall, which is something I had not thought about, that we had to think about as well with the notion of public safety. But it's high enough that it actually defines one space from the other space. And this is that space now, the outdoor space and how it interacts with the indoor space, and then the college then again on the left. And so that kind of really kind of summation aspect of it is really kind of thinking about how do we use these case studies, this kind of notion of program space, how arts and culture can transform a space, how an educational institution and client can really transform a space. And then, again, kind of close. As architects, our role is really to make spaces that bring the variety, the surprise, the comfort, and the joy. And ideally, by doing that, we bring aesthetics to it as well, and that this is a space that will be much loved, much appreciated, much well used, and that no one feels alienated in the process, either the college or the public. No one feels that they capitulated to the other, but that it was a project that was done in collaboration. And ideally, the next project that we're doing just beyond, which just broke ground, which is another 150 beds, will just make this an even stronger place and not be a separator between town and gown, but really a unifier. Thank you.
Yeah, very good. Well, it was very interesting, these two cases, because they refer as practical examples to what we discussed up to now. What do you think, if you look at your practices, at what you see, also at projects, architectural projects ongoing in an urban context, what do you think about these examples? Can they be transferred to your experiences, to your projects? What Sam showed here is the makeable. It's not a utopian dream, it's the makeable. We can do it. Huh? And even if we can do, as to refer to the morning, with this park in Rome and the comment from Michael Johansson from his project, even if we can do to perform something utopian successfully, examples like this must be makeable in any case, for sure. And then it's the question, what you think about it. Here we have to make it.
Could I just ask a question for understanding? The building number 4, number 1 on the very left, that we didn't talk about, it looked like as if it had a roof garden or a sports arena on top or something green on the roof.
Which building?
My
building or a different building?
No, there were 4 buildings on the college lawn, and the one on the very left.
Oh.
Yeah,
That's the career center.
The career center.
Yeah.
And is there a garden on top, or?
Yeah, there's supposed to be a green roof on. That's an adaptive reuse of the college's infirmary, their health center, and then will be turned into a career center.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's coming in the here soon.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
So that's built in the 1960s, energy consumptive, and that we've been very fortunate that we have 4 projects in Lafayette College. It's actually, we did a fraternity, and this is our 5th project that we're doing for them.
Good thing is there's some continuity.
No question, continuity is good.
Because this is an important point for building places for communities. We need community. I mentioned this Marc Roger, this anthropologist with his non-places. He opposed to the non-place what he called anthropological place. This is the place of belonging, of identity, and, as he adds, of history. But in this case of the new buildings, we can even create anthropological places without having a history of 300 anyone years. This is not a Campo in Siena or the piazza of another Italian town. It is newly made, But nevertheless, it's a place, and it can serve as a place. And this was my initial question to you. If you take these examples of the maker and how to transform it in your practice or in your conception of a city, of a practice in wider sense, you do not need architectural projects, but in your understanding, in your conception of the city, having in mind this synoikia, having in mind these green ideals, having in mind everything what we discussed in the morning. What is your opinion?
I like the project and your, well, I guess I have already raised your drawings, which I think is remarkable, but so are the buildings. It does not put so many, the star architect's ego into the building. The architect remains there, the buildings are wonderful, avoiding this flashy spectacle which we had been surrounded time and again. And you go to these spectacles, and I don't want to name names, but perhaps I do. Zaha Hadid, Rem Koolhaas, whomever. You go there once a time, look at it, go away, that's it. You don't want to, nothing invites you back. It's a flash up, a little bit of a trompe-l'oeil, which perhaps invites the journals there, because they are flashy building and everybody's there. These are quietly attractive buildings. And I increasingly use this maybe slow time architecture, which is not the immediate kind of bombastic flash up and then but it releases itself in time as people use it, and it becomes much more memorable throughout the time, the slower time, when perhaps people are slowed down by way of inhabiting the place. And it's not the flashy kind of thing that the photographers go there and wow. I like it very much.
This is the point of the history in the anthropological phase. Even if these places are built anew, they will develop history of their own. And this is the difference, since you mentioned it, between these flashy postmodernist buildings of Zaha Hadid and other guys, where you ask yourself, why in the hell this building has been made and all? For the ego of the architect? And on the other hand, it very finely fits to this cultural strain we had in the morning, this cultural strain of world-consuming, isolated, narcissistic solitaires. And the narcissistic solitaire, she or he can exist in the new environments of a real place, of course, but it's a totally different concept. Please.
Innanzitutto complimenti per il suo lavoro.
So first of all, thank you for your work.
E poi per quello che ho capito io, dato che purtroppo lingua ma quelli appunti che ho preso e quello che ho visto soprattutto.
So from what I have understood, from what I've heard, but also from what I've seen,
Mi sembra che ci sia una ricerca dello spazio ameno, cioè quello che i latini chiamavano l'opus amenum.
So it seems to me that you're talking about the search for locus amenus, usable, enjoyable
E
place,
questo rispettando la narrazione del luogo.
while also respecting the story of the place, the narration of the place.
Non c'è una trasformazione, mi sembra, ma una rivalutazione del luogo.
So not so much a transformation of the place, but a revalorization of the place
Con la restituzione al pubblico
by returning it to the public
e agli abitanti.
and the people.
Questi due casi soprattutto mi è piaciuto molto il Parco delle Arti all'Allentown.
I especially liked the Allentown Arts Pavilion.
Una cosa, il murale ce l'hanno fatto loro,
Okay, now who made the mural there?
Ho fatto
Is
solo...
there a mural behind
His
the?
name is
Solo-
Philip Webb from Philadelphia.
It's just qualcuno da Philadelphia, un artista da Philadelphia.
Sì, però l'hanno...
Did you commission it?
No, it already existed.
No, guarda, ho fatto
Esisteva.
Ecco, e mi sembra che anche l'inserimento paesaggistico, cioè il prato e le alberature lì intorno, siano state sono un buon intervento che io preferisco a quelli che fanno le arti star, insomma.
So he says he likes the landscape intervention and the trees that surround it.
Anche perché comunque bisogna intervenire con la vegetazione.
Because we have to intervene in terms of the landscape and the
Perché io
vegetation.
chiamo vegetazione quello che normalmente si chiama natura.
Because I used vegetation instead of nature.
Per ricreare un ambiente ameno, insomma, questo è. E questo dico
So it's an important part of creating a space like that is the vegetation.
I think those are all, great observations, and I want you to write the foreword to a monograph for our firm.
Poi ti viene anche. That's okay.
I'd like to make two additional comments, which you showed a building with a series of row houses
Yeah.
with the porches in front. I fully agree with that. That is the interface of the public and the private in a beautiful one. Even the bay windows could be and so on. But I really love those low profile walls, what you did, because I try to recall in any city where you can sit, there is no place to sit, to enjoy the urban theater, which is unfolding free if it does for you, but you can be part of it if you can rest for a while, and the wall there doubles as an immediate place to sit.
Yes.
People can discover it. And at the same time, it acts as a demarcation. Which,
And that's an interesting point, as a general interesting point, the lack of place in modernist architecture, a bit over-exaggerated. Either there are buildings by people like Zaha Hadid or Remkolas, as expressing the personal ego of the architect, no? And if they are placed under this category, we have seen it in Paris, as it is postmodernist so-called ideal places for people, as Arena Picasso or Abraxas, as postmodernist constructions designed for a community of people, horrible, hordes of crime, no? and a complete failure. No? This is interesting, and this is a point to return to, which are the critical success factors, according to your praxis, for successfully architectures for new communities. This is one thing, and the other thing is when we create places like this, how we could, let's say, multiply such an idea into our existing places, in the actual places we live, spaces/places we live. Could there be grassroots efforts to foster this, just as a question and as a perspective?
Right, the points have been brought up about starchitects, about building as object, and that I'm not, I have not been interested in that in particular. I like the kind of quiet, slow burn, and maybe because also coming from the University of Pennsylvania and the tradition of Louis Kahn, the importance of the outdoor room. And both of these projects I talked about, the outdoor space is just as important as the spaces that they're framed by.
absolutely.
Because that is, an outdoor room is really accessible to everyone.
Correct. And I am reminded of the 1960s Jane Jacobs book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, who for the first time as a non-architect writes about New York and how it has changed, but the liveliness and those components which make a place lively, attractive, is lost in that modernist building which then was populating the landscape indiscriminately. So perhaps there is a time to return to those ideas.
Well, it's all about the pedestrian city as far as we're concerned, the pedestrian experience and slowing things down.
That's right.
Because otherwise things move too fast.
That's right.
And that's why you keep a sketchbook, because those moments are fleeting, and the older we get,
That's right.
the moments are coming a little faster.
I tell my students for 1 month, you cannot use the computer, not even touch it. You have to have a sketchbook. Go out and record your ideas, which come in unexpected ways. When you already know you have a purposeful job, you think about it, jot it down. I'm delighted to see your drawings.
What about the critical success factors? If we try to make some, let's say, some general conclusions, there must be some critical success factors for making architectures for future communities. Out of your experience, you are in the field since years and you know the downfalls, the successes, everything. Which could be summarized the critical success factors for a successful architecture for communities? It's a difficult question, I know, but just to focus it.
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Maybe it's a good question to close with about what is the definition of success of making public spaces, and what is the definition of success of being a successful architect. And I brought up Kahn because as I've gotten older, I appreciated Kahn much more so than I did as a student. But Louis Kahn died $500,000 in debt. He was not a good manager. He died anonymously in Penn Station. We didn't know who he was, working in India, and been paid for a long, long time. As an architect, he will never be forgotten, but as a business person, it's somebody we don't want to emulate. We talk about that in the office a lot in many ways, but it is very hard, you know, not being an artist and turning it off and trying to be an architect and trying to be practical and pragmatic. And none of this work that I showed today would be here at all without a responsible client, be it a government or a private institution. If we don't have that, and we talked about that a little bit this morning about either governments or private institutions that care and can be compassionate, the architect really has a very little role. You talk about revolution. You know, I don't know what, you know, the revolution is us enlightening our clients and having our clients talk to them about what we care about. But it's wonderful to be in a position, and I feel extremely fortunate to have clients that way. But it is a never-ending job as an architect to find the next commission to do that and to build upon the successes that we have. When you apply for fellow status in the American Institute of Architects, you're supposed to write about yourself, and you're never supposed to write about the public, etc. And it's very antithetical to kind of general thinking. But I love these two projects. I love many of the jobs we have in the office right now because they are about transforming. And then, you know, the notion of success is interviewing students, interviewing users of the park afterwards, and saying, what did you get out of this? Did we hit the marks? Did we do everything that we were tasked to do? And how can we do this even better next time? Because we're never done.
Sean?
You said that your client was very happy with the university. Would you say it's because you also took in notion of like the surrounding? So was the university happy for you investigating like the other, you know, the town? Is that one of the factors that made them happy, or was it something different? Was it the efficiency?
It's a great question. And it's really both of those things, if not more than that, because they could easily hire an architect and say, here's your plot of ground, make 150 beds and put it here and make it work and make it meet this budget. But because they're an institution of higher learning and have students that care about context, care about energy efficiency, they knew when we started to talk to them that there's a bigger story to tell here, and because the colleges are always looking for enlightened students, they wanted to be able to tell a story about how this building, what the narrative was for its success, and that meant meeting people in the neighborhood, it meant understanding height, it meant about making it out of brick that fit into the neighborhood and not out of some much more contemporary material. You know, brick is a time-honored material, it's tactile, it fits in the hand, it can relate to the working man whose neighborhood that really was at one time. And they don't, again, they don't teach you about any of that in architecture school. I try to teach my own students about that because it's not just about design, but it's about the narrative and tell that story. And I think even the first project about the Allentown Arts Pavilion, they wanted a stage. That was the commission. Make a stage, make this a destination, but how do you make it not just a stage? You have a symphony on one side, you have a textile history, you have music. How can what we create there only be for that location? And all of a sudden there's a sense of pride and a sense of belonging and a sense of ownership. And to me, that makes architecture so much more fun than it could be otherwise.
It does seem to me that this actually, that this kind of success, it's just funny to me that this aspect of like understanding is actually contributes to
The success.
Yeah, exactly. For like, I mean, it says a lot that they had 5 commissions, and you got all of them.
Success.
Yeah.
It's probably because I didn't charge enough.
Question, is there a contradiction, it's a rhetorical question, nearly rhetorical, is there a contradiction, a success defined, between an architecture successful for generating communities, means for communities allowed to develop, and the success of the architect in the existing commission system, as a capitalist-based commission system?
Yeah, I think there's an inherent contradiction there. Can you bring up the folder right next to me a second? So I referenced this. This is from the New York Times. Broken promises shrink New Yorkers' rooms to relax. And so this is what I mentioned about the notion of public space. And so what this is talking about right here, and this is that map that I showed with all the blue dots, this is all the failed commitments made by all these developers at all these locations, and the bonuses that they were given to add floors, and how many times they've been cited for violations for not making their public space open. And I think that shows, as a capitalist society, the interest, I mean, honestly, greed of the more floors you add, the more you can charge for rent. But the fact that, and this shows, and I'll leave this out, about what the original intent was and how it's all been fenced off, really shows about the kind of general failure that if government or enlightened institutions don't get involved, the capitalistic system of bonusing developers to do certain things, it's just not going to work. And COVID didn't help, but it's not going to work.
Okay. Another point is the citizen participation. Also, this is in Europe at least, this is very beloved instruments, and one does not know, is it a real instrument to really participate citizens, or is it commedia dell'arte, made out of political. What do you think about citizen participation means to involve the future inhabitants in the project? Is this meaningful? When? Not?
I think, again, the difference between the United States and Europe is that you generally have higher taxes here because there's a notion of participation and using money gathered from the citizens for the common good. The United States is all about cutting taxes as low as it can, and that we need to it's social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. That way, we don't believe in that. And the notion that was mentioned before about if you raise taxes, it's the death knell of you ever getting reelected again. And in the last administration, we cut taxes even further, even for the rich. And in the United States, it's not going to get better anytime soon. And again, the issues of trains and public transportation, but if without public participation in a process and an appropriate tax base to serve the needs of the public, we're doomed to failure.
It seems that in this regard, at least, the US is a dead-end street. It's due to systemic forces, systemic resilience. But question to the public: if you look at the case in Europe, we have citizen participation. What do you think about this instrument? Is this an instrument or commercial enough, or both?
It depends on. So there are, I guess there are some projects that really work out,
Okay.
and there is participation in the sense that it was intended, but it often is just a necessity of politics. So you get a website and some polls or something, and nothing happens afterwards.
Okay.
It's called lip service.
That's what we call it. Please. You should
No, io potrei, dato che è venuta fuori la discussione del rapporto con il pubblico, il rapporto con gli abitanti, questo è un fatto molto importante che ha sottolineato.
What you underlined about the relationship with the public and the inhabitants is
Vorrei ricordare che nell'anno 2000, è stata sottoscritta al Consiglio d'Europa una convenzione sul paesaggio.
In the year 2000 there was written into the council.
È stata sottoscritta la convenzione sul paesaggio. Convenzione sul paesaggio.
So in the landscape convention of 2000?
È praticamente una legge perché è passata per tutti i parlamenti.
A law that was passed in all the parliaments.
Ma non l'Unione Europea, il Consiglio d'Europa.
In the
Questi fanno
European
parte
Council.
anche nazioni che non sono dell'Unione
Which
Europea.
included some nations that are not part of the European Union.
Questa convenzione che è stata sottoscritta, quindi approvata dal Parlamento, sia in Italia che in Germania, che in Francia,
There was a convention that was approved by all of these entities.
obbliga di fatto che ogni intervento architettonico paesaggistico deve essere discusso con gli abitanti.
So it states that every architectural intervention that involves the landscape must be discussed with the inhabitants.
Questo è molto importante perché il paesaggio è considerato luogo di vita.
Because the landscape is considered like
Quindi
part
Place to live.
central to
c'è un tessuto sociale,
cosa?
c'è un tessuto
It's part of
sociale,
the social fabric.
per cui solo che purtroppo poi è disattesa la legge, cioè non viene, cioè ovunque si costruisce spesso senza consultare il
So
pubblico.
even though this law was passed, nobody pays attention to it.
That is the point. Does it, even if new frameworks, new political frameworks are created, nobody takes care, which means referring to this idea of the systemic resilience, there must be other forces at work making even new official, means legal frameworks obsolete. And it's a very interesting point, and this is not very, it has to be considered if you want to create new places for new communities, because this is the business at the end of the day. This is the final aim, strategic aim. When we speak about the natural city, in the sense we had it in the morning, this is the final aim. Another point is, yeah, so what do you think? There's an additional point, it can come later. What do you think about this? We have legal frameworks and they are in fact useless. What to do? In the direction of place of our community. What to do?
We work sometimes with the city of Karlsruhe together,
Yeah.
and that sometimes can be difficult due to different culture.
Mm-hmm.
So the government more or less has some things to do, and they do it in their way,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
based on the laws and the regulations and everything. Nothing else matters in the end. So there might be nice ideas and everything, but in the end it's just what's it has to be done what politics decided. And that's it. And it's a completely different culture. So it's a very hierarchic system in the government and not on par with the society, with the people. So that platforms for the discussion need to be established. Also the culture needs to be adapted a little bit. Each side has to adapt a little bit.
But also then the mandate to actually change something. Because if you involve people and they have no impact by that involvement, they get disconnected. And therefore they say, we cannot trust the politicians. So you actually have to let them in a real way. And for me, when I work, this is extremely important and quite hard. And therefore we don't do that much projects. Because we say, we need the people we invite to have an impact on what you are telling us to do. You have to change things. And of course here we interfere with several democratic states, how they are built up. Because we have democracy through representation. I vote for a person who will represent me. And then I can expect that this person will do its job. I should not do it. So why involve me? I have given my vote to you. Go ahead. You should have the ideas. So I can bother with something else. And then you have in the laws and regulations that you should ask people in. You should invite them to have an opinion. But this opinion doesn't make an impact because there are laws and regulations that hinders all these good ideas to be incorporated into planning, for example. So it's really hard to...
This is the second comedian update.
Yeah.
The participants in SPE are invited, but if there is no impact, okay, please. You first. No. Okay. You?
I just agreed.
You just agreed. We have other examples. Martin, one question. Die Karlsruher Beispiele mit der Quartierbildung, ist das hier sinnvoll zu bringen oder nicht?
Why not, yeah.
Okay. We have other examples of making quartiers and real participation. Would you like to say some short words about it?
Why not, yes.
Okay.
Yes, what's really the problem is if you have this participation, that I'm totally with you. We have invited 10 years ago, Peter, I think you remember, the people to come together to think about the future of the city and the city places. And they have 50–60% one wish, more green in the city, more green on the places. And then, 10 years, the architecture experts and so on told them, that's not possible. That's not possible. That's not possible. And the planning chiefs or the chiefs tell them, no, that's not the style, that's not the style, that's not the style. Now we have finished the place without any green, and there's no sense to invite in future one person to ask how you want to have your central place. That's for me the best example for what you told us. That makes no sense. You have to change the format. You have to change. You have to. They are experts, also experts. But if we have only the law, and the other experts told them, we are the experts. You are only normal Christians. You have no ideas. That's, I think, in Germany, in a lot of planning processes, that is the biggest fault you can do, and we have done it in this city.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Please.
I also think that they should learn how to communicate with each other. They speak really often very completely different languages. And on the other hand, they are very suspected one to the other. The policy think, oh, that's only a burden because then it costs time and probably they are no expert, they don't know anything, or they're only thinking of themselves. And on the other side, the people think they don't listen to others, they do what they want, and they don't feel respected from each other. That's my experiences with such projects.
Okay. Are there ways to get rid of this lack of respect, of this hiatus? This hiatus effect, the gap.
Yeah.
Or is this a political issue? I'm deliberately now very, very direct. No? Is this a political issue? People in power, please. No?
We changed now the system. We built smaller groups directly in their quarter, not to invite the whole city center to think about the future. Yeah. And from that point on, we have now projects. The people in front of their house, they wish, because they are the decision makers by their own. It's their house, it's their next area, and it's better to think in more simple areas, or not to make this huge. We make now a new plan for the whole city center. We change it now, and it works better. That's one example for it.
That's right.
Okay. Please.
But I also think what you just started to mention is that the policy, the guide should be a good guidance. Should give a good guidance, because if they are in power, they can also say, okay, we can talk together and be creative together, or we don't. And then it's only a waste of time and energy. And I think it's really up also. That's their responsibility, I think.
Okay. How to settle what Michael mentioned, this have no impact, have no mandate. No? Because we get no mandate, we have no impact. No matter how intensively we are participating. No? Also this Cometa dell'arte effect. How to solve this Cometa dell'arte effect? What do you think?
I mean, what's often discussed is direct voting, like in Switzerland, where you have certain topics and it's decided by the public in the end. Directly a question to the public, decided like they decided. We don't have that. So if we have a petition, the petition is discussed only, and the outcome is open. So it might be that the politicians say, yeah, we listen to it, but we don't agree, so.
Okay. Another perspective. All right. Another perspective on the same problem. We have seen as an architectural realized place, this one image with generating a space by a small wall. It's invitation and confinement at the same time. For a group of people. What if we take the perspective, okay, why not smaller, decentralized communities, as in the new approach Martin reported, can make their environment in a meaningful frame, of course, more or less by themselves. And this is a revival of the idea we had in the morning, the idea of the Greek polis. Here we have it again. We are a small, decentralized community of people. We are defining our fate, our future. We have some good architects, or invite some good architects to make really good places, and that's it. We do no longer need these classical centralized systems. This would be a revolution, the other kind. Also, I'm just thinking, I'm not. Please. Also, I'm no revolutionist.
I think you have a point. I just go back to those endless meetings which I am sometimes subjected to, and the more people talk, the less conclusion comes out of it. So I think that decentralized, smaller communities could make valuable decisions for the immediate environment there. And then the city as an incremental addition to these smaller contributions could be an interesting mosaic. I don't necessarily deny that there needs to be an overall kind of thing which holds the whole thing perhaps together. So I'm not necessarily saying that just this way or that way, but maybe between the two. But I really think that the smaller groups, the smaller areas, we pay attention in some of these projects could be much more effective than, well, including the city hall.
Can I play the advocatus diaboli for once? I would love to argue that there's also the contrary the case. If we all think about the 80s and the huge public discussion about the glass pyramid of IMP in Paris, and it was only due to the stubbornness and I would say the far-sightedness of Mitterrand, who against all normal democratic processes said, I have the will, I think it's right, I will do it. And now everybody loves it. Even the Paris people, they love it. It's like a major thing. You can have fashion shows of Chanel, you have that. You have an enormous public space underground, which is totally attractive, not only for tourists, but as I said, also for the community. And you can't deny it's a major part of Paris again. So if we would have this democratic process to say, let's discuss about it, it wouldn't have been done. So we do have here a problem with both sides, and both sides sometimes is right, sometimes it's totally wrong. And I do believe there's one thing which has a common thing, and it's the intention.
The intention.
We just judge it by the intention. There we get close and there is no polarity anymore with that.
It's an important point, and if I may prolong your line of the advocatus diaboli, let's unite devils. No? So I will join you. The problem is democracy is mediocrity. No? It's a nice thing if immediate neighborhoods are deciding about their garden dwarfs in their gardens and their little houses. No? Where's the style? Where's the beauty? Where is the overall impression? It's gone. Also I do not want to have garden dwarfs here. Not by democratic decision, sure not. And this is a drawback, and this is an old discussion as regards ideal cities, because in the end we are speaking about the idea of the ideal city. The other pole also to the democratic approach is we have what we had in the morning, the architectus elegans. The architect, the mastermind, the genius mastermind is planning the whole thing, the whole ensemble, the ideal city. And then we have it as this pyramid example. After some time, all these mediocre Democrats will accept it as a great piece of art. It's a very bad position. Advocatus diaboli. Very bad. Misa.
Centre Pompidou would be a second example for the same.
Tour Eiffel was another one where it was
even Tour Eiffel was hated.
But how to find a way between these poles? So we can go, we will have our break. No problem, right now. But the last question, how we find a way between these two poles? Democracy is needed,
yes,
and to avoid mediocrity. So we need a genius and we need a people. How to combine it?
People must understand the genius.
I think it's always dialogue. Dialogue.
It's a dialogue.
We have to talk to each other.
No, we have to speak with each other.
But you know, I don't think people, the public generally realizes how long it takes for an idea to turn into something, and the frustration about how many years certain things have been talked about that was mentioned outside here.
Right.
For every Mitterrand, you have Ceausescu in Romania, where the dictatorial notion of I'm going to do what's good for the public, and you do need to find that kind of middle ground. And these projects that I showed, the government completely has abdicated all responsibility. Arts and culture, in the one aspect, was coming from a private developer, and the college university stepped up a place to stitch town and gown together the government didn't do. And the social problems of, at least in the United States, of gun violence and homelessness are completely abdicated, because that's what government should be focusing on right now. And if the person who's going to be a genius is the person who focuses on how to bring beauty and art and solves gun violence and homelessness at the same time. You make that happen, you're going to be reelected and reelected and reelected.
Yeah.
I just came back from Ljubljana, where Josef Plečnik, the famous architect at the beginning of the 20th century, kind of made a very interesting city design by not destroying things but framing the old buildings and giving a total new vision on the city. If you have not yet been there, please go and have a look. This is very interesting way of kind of redesigning an existing structure and giving it more value.
Defining the inner center.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Are there any other
There was
comments?
another thing, Josef Plečnik, coming from Vienna School of Architecture, it was the time of nationalism. So now we think nationalism is very bad, but we have to also think in 19th century, nationalism was avant-garde movement.
That's right.
I mean, Italy was,
Or the modernismo in Italy.
Right.
Fantastic.
Even Germany was several states, as we know, Stuttgart, and with all the deficiencies maybe.
And Weinbrenner designed the culture of nationalism.
All that. Only the nationalistic convergence made the industrial development possible, I guess, right? In Germany and so on. So these are things, and Plečnik, coming back to Plečnik, he tried to define a new national style to give emphasis of the proudness of Slovenia. So, and he did it in a very smart way, because he was kind of deriving from predecessors and kind of giving it a twist and having an enormously elegant way of expressing something which is kind of defining a special culture, but still connecting it as it was historically to the past. And for that,
very delicate use of materials.
Very delicate and amazing. So there's a lot to learn from Plečnik, I guess. As well, absolutely.
Right. Any further comments? It's an important issue. Any further comments? Or is the break demanding thing? It's up to you. It's up to you.
All right.
All right. Sam?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ja, many thanks.